Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I'm Zartash, and I'm going to teach you people um, very important topics from your course, morphology and syntax. And the topics that I'll be covering are two of them I'll be covering. First of all, we are going to discuss in this lecture an introduction to government and mining theory. And in the second lecture, I'll be discussing minimalist program. So let's start with the introduction to government and mining theory. As you people know that syntax basically studies um, the structural relationships between sentences, phrases, even words, and these relationships they carry not only structures with them but also meanings. So both these aspects. Let me share a very important definition of grammar. It was in the book written by Chomsky's student. So it says that grammar is basically, it deals with both meaning plus structures. So there is a very, very important relationship between the meanings that structures convey. So simply structures can't be everything. For instance, let me share with you Chomsky's famous sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Now, in this structure, we have structure that is meaningful, but it carries no meaning. It means it's not possible for green ideas to sleep and sleep furiously. So, these two dimensions are very important. And in Chomsky's theories, be it generative grammar and then government and mining theory and minimalist program, we will be seeing how these structures they meaningfully convey those meanings and how those structures they have their deeper and surface constructions and how they convey various relationships. So let's get started and let me show you how the simple structures that you encounter in your daily life when you use a language, they carry inside them such not complicated, rather, I must say, amazing structures. So from now on, I would be calling government and mining theory. I will be referring GB as government and mining theory. So it is an important theory in syntax, and it is also a kind of phrase structure grammar. So what kind of grammar is this? A phrase structure grammar. How phrases they are structured and how those structures they are then realized in sentences. So that will be the concern of this theory. So it was basically developed the tradition from which it emerged, transformational grammar. Let me call it transformational generative grammar. Basically, the philosophy behind transformational grammar was that, or is that, uh, that an overall theme, let me share it with you, that structures, they carry their forms, ill-formed and well-formed structures you people are well aware of. ill-formed are incorrect and well-formed are correct. So um, we can generate endless sentences if the structures are in front of us. So transformational grammar, it suggests how those transformations in structures lead us towards the construction of more structures. So it was a kind of development in that theory, and principal exponent of this theory was Noam Chomsky in 1980s. And later, the revised version is called Minimalist Program in 1995 that we will be discussing in our second lecture. And it highlights the phrase structure. So phrase structure is its concern. We'll see this theory elaborates how how phrases they are basically structured and how those structures actually exist. What are the things that are structuring them? For instance, if I say that here is a structure that is a subject and then a verb and then an object, and then the thing is how we are having those structures. Is there something inherent in them, within in them? So that will be the concern of this theory, and it is based on the principles and parameters model of language. You people may have heard about universal grammar that says that all the languages in the world, they carry uh, similar structures, or may say a similar grammar, in which there are two important elements, principles and parameters. So this theory also is a kind of based on this thing, that there are principles and there are parameters. Principles, they put forward the rules that govern structures, and parameters are the shifts and switches that are possible. And the concept of universal grammar, that all the languages in the world, they have principles. They are universal. Why they are universal? Because they all are having principles and parameters in them. That's why we have a kind of universal grammar, in the sense that each and every language, it possesses principles and parameters. So in those principles and parameters, how phrase structures they are built up and how they are further elaborated and extended in sentences, that we will be seeing. So the next is uh, it assumes that all the languages, they carry the same underlying structures. So universal grammar. So there exists a universal grammar. A large portion of the grammar of any particular language is common to all languages. So which one is that large portion of the grammar? So that large portion of the grammar is those structures that we are going to discuss, and they are common. Let me, these are a large portion of grammar, principles and parameters. They are common to all languages in the world, and that's why this is a kind of uh, part of universal grammar, and that says that languages, they share similar structures, underlying and surface structures. So it further says, government and binding theory, it says that universal grammar means any language, any grammar of a language can be broken down into two more components. So those important components are these: levels of representation and a system of constraints. Let me explain one thing. Uh, yeah, when we are discussing principles and parameters and universal and empirical methods, it's a kind of empirical study. Empirical study means scientific. Scientific means that which applies to all of the languages, regardless of any particular language. This applies to all of the languages like Urdu, Punjabi, French, English. So the methods, the theory will apply to all of them. So universal grammar, any grammar of a language. So it has two things, two main components. The first one is the level of representation. Level of representation indicates is the way uh, a language represents its structures. It is basically the level of representation is the level at which the structures are in front of you, like deep structure and surface structure, and this kind of representation we are talking about here. And further, I'm going to elaborate it further, and so its meanings will be much clearer to you. Let me just explain a theme here. So level of representation is how structures they represent themselves, how they can be interpreted, how they're structured, and uh, what are the now the second is a system of constraints. As the name suggests, it basically highlights how those structures are going to strung together. What are the constraints that will apply to those structures, that will decide how those structures they're going to they are going to be explained or elaborated. So level of representation will be putting forward in front of us a structure, for instance, a simple structure, for instance, um, an analysis of the sentence. For instance, if this is a sentence, structure, and analysis of the sentence. So level of representation will deal how these structures they are related to each other, how they are strung in that how they're strung together in that phrase, whilst the system of constraints will determine which thing will can be moved, which structure will be placed where, which will be the head and which will be the complement. So these are the things that these two components will be dealing, and we're going to see them further. I will elaborate these two structures with diagrams, so they will be much clearer to you. So far we have discussed that government and mining theory that is based on the philosophy of universal grammar. It says that all the languages they possess some components, and what are those components? They are two: level of representation and a system of constraints. And these components they determine how their phrases will be structured, and that thing will determine how sentences will be constructed. So basically, we are going to see the analysis of this theory basically explains, highlights, analyzes the deeper and surface both levels of analysis of uh, phrases. And why it focuses phrases is that sentences are then constructed with phrases. So let's move ahead and see the next. So here the two elements, surface structure and deep structure, they basically elaborate those elements that we have discussed earlier. The element of uh, representation and a system of constraints. Basically, it can be said that surface structure, there are two elements that we are going to discuss, surface structure and deep structure. So we can say that surface structure is basically the representation level, and representation is at two levels, phonological form and logical form. Basically, it can be said that the most important concept that Chomsky proposed were they are surface and deep structure, because they highlight the internal structures of various elements. So it can be said that surface structure is actually the thing that is produced and it is in front of you, and when it is produced, so it will have two forms. One is that is pronounced, and the other is which is written. So we can say that uh, phonological form, the PF, you're going to remember these abbreviations because we are going to need them ahead. And the logical form is basically the way it is strung together in front of you. It can be said it is the written form. So let me give you an example. For instance, here is a sentence. Guest children can be a trouble. Okay, here that's a simple sentence. There should have been a full stop that I have missed. Well, I'll add it later. So, guest children can be a trouble is a sentence, and its surface structure is right in front of you. Its phonological form is its pronunciation, like I am speaking, and its logical form is here is the subject, guest children, and here is the predicate area. So logically we have subject and predicate, and we have tense here, and the subject is clearly written, children, which children, guest children, and what they can be a trouble. So everything is in front of you, and this is what basically a surface structure is. A surface structure basically highlights what is right in front of us and how those meanings they are being conveyed. Uh, Actually, this thing is important. How those meanings are conveyed. It basically lies on the logical form, how it is written. Because if I'll say that children can be a trouble, the meanings will be different. Guest children can be a trouble is another meaning, and a trouble here it indicates what is associated with what. So that's what basically a surface structure is. Then coming to deep structure. Deep structure basically is, you may say, the inner or laying structure of the surface level sentence. Here is a sentence, its surface level is in front of you, its logical form, its phonological form, but its deep structure is not in front of you, it is deep inside, hidden, and can be elaborated. So we can say that the deep structure is a, an abstract structure that allows any native speaker to clearly understand what the sentence means. Means it is related to their competence, it is related to their hidden knowledge of that language, or it can be said that the deep structure it expresses the semantic content and surface structure, whereas it is determined by its phonetic form. So, for instance, here, children, children are guests sometimes, they visit, and sometimes they're trouble, and trouble can be a child, all the possible meanings, and this surface structure then, in fact, determines what meaning can be associated here. So these two dimensions, they basically highlight how um, sentences, they have their two important aspects, that of a surface and that of a deeper level, and how these two levels, they uh, together uh, determine the structure and meaning of a sentence. So let me give you a quick review that we have so far discussed, then we'll go ahead into analysis of some structures. We're going to actually practically see how these structures, they work. So let me give you a quick review. Basically, we're discussing government and binding theory, which basically says that deals with which basically deals with the phrase structures, and it basically says that there are two main components of any of a language: the level of representation and the level of constraints. We saw the level of representation and the constraints. These two levels basically deal what will be represented, how it will be represented, and what will be the possible constraints. So you guys may have understood the abbreviations. Logical form, logical form is the form that is written in front of you in a logical manner, and that is D structure, which is deep structure, and surface structure. So let's see how they interact. So it provides a model consisting of 4 levels of representation. And these 4 levels are being elaborated here: 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these levels are constrained by rules. So the two levels that we discussed, level of representation and a system of constraints, that is right in front of you. That's what representation is, and this thing is going to discuss constraints. So let's start lexicon. As you know, the lexicon is the vocabulary that we have, and here lies surface structure. And surface structure has its two forms. For instance, phonological form and logical form. And then we have deep structure. Basically, first comes, according to this model, lexicon, means what are the things that we're going to say and with the help of which words. And then the deeper structure, that is native speakers' ability to understand and analyze and internally, and then we decide what will come out of surface. So deeper levels decide what children should be. Let's take this example. So first comes this stage: children are trouble, or guest children are trouble. When are children trouble? When they are guests? So I should have mentioned guest here. So children are trouble, but when they are trouble? When they are guests? Yes, when I have mentioned, when they visit and when they are guests. So the deeper structure, it decides what will come out of surface, and then we have a phonological form that the words are said, guest children can get trouble, and the logical form, how varies subject and varies predicate, you people may have seen that sometimes, for instance, if it is a poetic form, then subject and predicate they are reversed, sort of, in order to give the rhythmic sense. In that case, even if the predicate, subject, and predicate they are reversed, uh, even then their deeper structures will remain the same. For instance, let's take some English poetic verse. Well, I have none in my mind, but perhaps you guys would be having. So just imagine, for instance, falling on the leaves, a tiny drop of rain. So I just constructed a line. Uh, Here you can see, although I have reversed the structure, that is the logical form, but still the deep structure, the meanings will remain the same. So logical form decides there is the subject and predicate. Things cannot be illogical. For instance, children guessed, can be trouble are. So no, yeah, so that will be illogical then. So I think so. These things are clear. Now we are going to discuss this. So we have a deep structure leading to surface structure, and these moves are basically rules. These rules decide how they will be structured. For instance, here move A. You people can download this article. I have mentioned it in the reference, and there he has further explained what basically move A is. Basically, the writer says that these are basically rules that constrain how things can be structured here. I have told you that deep structure, the level of deep structure, our minds decide how things they will be provided, meaning, and which structures will be used. For instance, you are angry, you wish to express anger, you will decide which words they really, really express that anger. So rules here will decide how things will be structured, and rules here will be decide they will be deciding how surface structure will be laid. So basically, these are the constraints, the rules. They are related to one another by rules. So move is a rule, and here is a rule, and this is uh, their structure. So this diagram basically it highlights how a simple sentence it moves through various stages, and various elements decide its structure and its color, and various constraints like rules and principles they govern how it will be it will be structured. And parameters, they can be shifted, they can be switched. Parameters will allow shift. Let me remind you. Here is principles and parameters. Principles cannot be changed. They will remain the same. And parameters are the things that can be switched and changed. Now here we have some principles. For instance, here are the principles. But we have some parameters as well. How at each and every level that thing is parameter that allows you to change it. For instance, switch it, how things can be represented in a different way. So those are different switches that are up to the speaker to decide, and the speaker has the liberty to decide those things. They are the parameters. So this diagram it is reflecting 4 levels of representation of government and binding theory. And with this diagram, I'm actually heading towards explaining what government and binding basically means. Here in this diagram, something is governing, and here in this diagram, something is binding. That's what government and binding is. So we're going to see further. We're going to actually discuss these. So here it is. What actually the words government and binding they indicate in this theory. So the term government here refers actually to governance. It is basically the relationship that will govern the other relationships. It is an abstract syntactic relation that applies to structures in which one structure actually uh, dictates or governs the other structure, and the other structure may be governing some other structure that are under its command. And so far as the binding relation is concerned, it binds those structures together. And as you know, the thing that binds them together is most of the time uh, referential, co-referential materials like between pronouns and their expressions, and they are, for instance, mm, he, his mother, or Ali's book, his book. Here, two references, two noun phrases. They are being here. You can see binding relationship between them. The pronoun his is actually binding it with the subject. Uh, so that basically are the two structures, governing structures and structures that bind things together. Let's see our previous diagram. Here you can see that how each structure is governing the other structure, and certain things you can say they are playing the role of binding them together. For instance, deep structure governs the in this model you can say deep structure governs the surface structure, and surface structure is then determining its phonological form and its logical form. And then we have constraints and the rules that will be followed and things that will uh, be decided because of those rules. So basically government and binding theory, it basically highlights how those phase structure, let me recall you the things that we discussed earlier. Yes, phrase structures. It basically highlights how those phrase structures they have governing elements in them, and they have binding elements with them. So we are going to see further with examples how some structures in a phrase they will be governing the other structures, and how some structures they will be playing the role of binding them together. And what are certain things are principles, they are not going to shift, rather certain things are parameters and they will shift. So uh, in each phrase you will be saying in each phrase how certain things they certain structures they govern other structures, and with that comes the meanings that we wish to express. For instance, we had this example here: guess children can be trouble. Can you people guess what are the what can be the possible governing elements here, and what can possibly be the binding structures here? So we can guess that if they are broken into phrases, for instance, guess children noun phrase NP, and can be as VP, and a trouble again another phrase. So in each phrase, for instance, this is NP. So can you guess which one is governing element here? If one we have a head and we have a complement. So I won't spoil the suspense here, your curiosity. Let's move ahead and analyze the diagram and then decide how certain things they are going to govern and other structures they are going to bind those governing elements. So next we have a diagram here. Okay, diagram. Okay, let me elaborate further the element of government. So let's first discuss the element of government and then element of binding. And we have diagrams here to elaborate them, where we have two diagrams to elaborate government. So basically, government, it basically governs the structure. Here is an example. Structure A governs structure B, and how it governs, the condition is A will be the governor. If someone wishes to govern, then that structure is going to be the governor. Governor here is the structure that is that is the one that will decide the structure, the meaning, and it can put restraints on others. So A is going to be structure A is going to be a governor, then it can govern B. So an element of government then it can be. And then second thing is that structure A, M commands B. Here M commands mean it is a syntactic relation between two elements in a tree diagram. So M command, you may have seen that in a tree diagram we have structures like that. They are the commands and they highlight our relationship. And this relationship is kind of just like tree and its branches. First comes sentence, then comes phrase, then comes phrase within that phrase, and then comes a phrase within that phrase, and then comes a phrase within that phrase. So that is what it is. Well, I am going to elaborate this structure, M structure, further in a diagram. For instance, here we have that structure. Each phrase is within those phrases. So this is what M command is, and the element of governor that is going to govern the whole structure. And the third one is no barrier intervenes between A and B. So the third condition should be that there should be no barrier between A and B, structure A and B. For instance, if a structure A and B are right here, A structure and B structure, so there shouldn't be an intervening element. Otherwise, A will be governor of that intervening element. Suppose we have an intervening element that is C. So A and structure B. Suppose this is structure A, this is structure B, and here comes the intervening element C. So then A would be governing C and C would be governing B. The things would be like that. So in simple terms, I can say that the element of government are those structures, those phrases that rule the other element. In a tree diagram, you may have seen them and you may have considered them as superior phrases or some names like that. Here we're just going to we are going to name them as government elements. The governor, the things that will be governing others. So let's have a look. Here it is. The important thing is that governors are going to be the heads of lexical categories. I think so. Here it is a mistake. Things should be verb, noun, and adjective and preposition. Let me correct it. So here it is, lexical categories. And when they are going to head them, then we'll put P with them. The reason I have removed P is that these are simple lexical categories like this: noun, noun, and PP will be further elaborated with determiner and preposition, and then again an NP, the sentence. So, uh, phrases, the element P, when it will be attached with them, for instance, VP, here we would mean that it is housing all of them, it is governing all of them. Let me elaborate with this picture, this diagram. We have NP here. We have NP, not noun. We do not have noun. We have NP. The reason we have NP and not noun is that NP refers to an element that is going to house them all. All the nouns. Here is a noun, here is a noun. It is going to house all of them. That's why I have placed P with it. So it is NP, and NP is housing all of them. So governors are basically heads of these categories, like here they are. And we have NP here, an analysis of the sentence, and we have NP here as the governor, and it is governing these structures. So in NP we have a specifier. It is specifying the meaning of the rest of the sentence, and then we have N node, and in this node again we have noun, which is analysis, and then we have another phrase, that is preposition phrase, and this thing is governing them all. This thing is governing these only, not them. So let me elaborate it further. Here we have preposition and again NP. So we can say that PP is governing NP here, and which is an NP, the sentence. They have they have drawn a triangle, and thus they have summed up. Well, we can elaborate them further. We can do it like that. We have PP. Here comes preposition. Here comes NP, and in NP again a specifier, that is the, and then again noun. We have sentence. So each element is governing the other element. So can you tell me which elements are governors here? So these are here, NP, and NP is governing them all. Then we can say that this node is the next one, and this element, this preposition phrase, is governing the noun phrase. So that's how the element of the governing structures they work. So at deeper levels, like we discussed earlier, the surface and deep structures, this basically highlights the deep structure. Surface structure is here, an analysis of the sentence, and all this is the deep structure. It helps us understand how how these structures are strung together, how languages they work, how languages they structure things, and how they are different from one another. How one language is different from one another. And why are we actually discussing these structures? The reason is that this study will help us learn more languages. If you learn a language surface and deep structure, it will be very easy for you to master it. You will be able to strung those structures together. For instance, let me give you an example. If you watch a little, if you learn a little some other language, for instance Chinese, your English structures, they will be helping you. For instance, you would be seeing where the verb is, where the subject is, where the predicate is. In fact, English will be building a foundation where you can lay the building of that other language. So These structures, they help us understand languages in a much different way. So let's see a very good example ahead. Here I just provided you a small glimpse of how deep and surface structures they work. Here they are much more elaborated and they are much more complex. It is showing that deep structures are governed and assigned cases by their governing heads. So in this diagram, you can see how governing heads, they are uh, 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 in fact laying a sequence in which each structure is laid. For instance, here is an example. Tim thought that Kate believed the story. Here, this structure is reflecting how they are being structured. Each element is, in fact, governing the other element. For instance, if I tell you Tim, then the possible structures you can add. If I tell you Tim thought, then you can see what possible structures can there be. For instance, Tim thought that Kate believed his story. So these structures will be determining this element. This structure will determine these. For instance, if we say, for instance, instead of this name, I place cats. Cats are loving animals. Cat is a loving element. So here singular or plural form will determine which form this element, that is verb, will be having. If the noun here NP is plural, then the form will be S will be added. It will be plural, and if the form is singular, then then we will have a singular verb here. And if a name is here, we know what are the further requirements accordingly. So let's see, these are the surface level structures that are in front of you, and they are parallel. They are written just in one line, but here you can see this angle is reflecting their stages, their levels. For instance, first comes sentence or metric clause. Metric clause means, and this one is subordinate clause. Here it is metric clause. So we have sentence or metric clause, that is housing another clause, and we have here in sentence or metric clause we basically have the governors NP and VP. So here this governor is housing them all, and here this one is housing this. For instance, we had a different subject. For instance, the tall, lean, pleasant looking boy Tim thought that Kate believed the story. So then NP would be housing them all. So here we have just a simple noun, and here we have VP, verb phrase, and verb phrase is governing verb plus subordinate clause, and subordinate clause is governing noun phrase and verb phrase plus complement. Complement, each and every subordinate clause, it begins with a complement. So complement and a noun phrase and a verb phrase. Again, this is the governing element and it is governing them both. And here, this one is the governing element that is governing the rest of them. So the rest of them are verb and noun phrase, and in that noun phrase we have the story. Uh, so there could be subject, subordinate clause 1, subordinate clause 2, subordinate clause 3. They would be in this direction, uh, vertical structure, we may say, and this one is parallel. Against this parallel structure, we have this vertical structure. So you can see how government, the element of government here, the governing elements, they are working. Each element is governing the other element, and this one is merely its surface structure. And let me remind you what were the elements of a surface structure. Its written form, that is right in front of you, and its phonological form. But here lies the deep structure, which indicates how each and every level is being determined by the uppermost and highermost element. So we have governors here, they are governing, and including this one, but this one is housing the most of them. And because, as you can see, NP, it is just like subject and predicate. So predicate is uh, under VP. So this element is then housing them all. I think so. Now the concept is quite clear, and there is no more confusion. And with a quick review, I'll move ahead. So we were discussing the element of government in the government and binding theory, and government means um, the relationship that governs, that controls in the sense it governs the other element, and there mustn't be any intervening element. So you can see that each element is lined up according to its plan. So that's how the element of government, it highlights the governing relationship in these structures. It elaborates how phrases, they have the element of constraint and structure within them, and how each structure is being determined by the other structure. Even while we are talking, we are speaking, we're making words, you can see that at deeper levels, deep structure that is in your brain, you are constantly deciding which elements should be placed in front of which element. Lexicon helps you which elements, which structures, they truly reflect your thoughts. Which word basically reflects your anger, which word basically reflects your hatred, which word basically reflects your uh, the feeling that you have, and those things are then realized in surface structures, and the background remains with the government and binding element. So let's see what basically binding elements are. Here it is, a very, very simple concept. It refers to the construction of the referential relations. So referential relations, just like I told you, Ali, his book, and John, his mother. Here the example is, and it also reflects how different elements they refer to one another. Binding relation is basically binding these structures together. These structures are governing elements, and binding elements, they are basically binding them together. Otherwise, they'll make no sense. For instance, John saw mother. What? Whose mother? His mother. For instance, if I say that I saw paper. I saw paper. I saw a paper, and or I saw green paper, I saw his paper. So there should be binding elements that then, in fact, in one way, they put colors into the meanings, or they help us understand meaning, or in fact, they are responsible for conveying the meanings. So that's how they work. Um, so here we have example of a sentence in which tree diagram starts with sentence and then NP and VP, and we have this important thing here is the relationship of this pronoun with this noun. Here his mother is binding this NP with this one. Let me uh, here it is. Relationships between pronouns and the expressions with which they co-occur or they are co-referential, thus relationships that bind them together. So we are talking about the expressions that require to be referred. For instance, in this diagram, if the things would be his story, then Tim thought that Kate believed his story. Here, his would mean it is Tim then, because it is, and if I would put her story, then the meanings would be different. Like, listen and to the sentence carefully. Tim thought that Kate believed his story. His story means this man's story. The meanings would be different. It means that this person is has something to do with this person's story. And if things would be like that, Tim thought that Kate believed her story. It seemed that if some lies are going on, or you may say how absurd it looks. If I put her here, is that possible that we actually start believing our stories? Or this can be satirical. Such meanings can be derived from this then. So you can see how these elements they they color the or they determine the meanings. So here it is. John saw his mother. So there should be, if we remove here, if we remove this binding element, then the meanings won't be perfect one, or meanings won't be clear. So we need it here, and we can say that here John NP is commanding this this NP this NP in which we have this binding element, this referencing element. So that's how they link with each other. And if the meanings are not clear, then the sentence would be illogical and meanings won't be clear. So that's how it works. It is very simple. The governing elements will be governing, whereas binding elements will be binding those governing elements together, and thus together they will build those two aspects that I discussed before, the aspect of meaning plus structure. So let me say that this element is dealing with the structure. It is structuring them, how each structure is being determined by its superior structure or its governor. That's what the term we used, and how this element is basically binding them together into meaningful structures. So both of these elements, the deep and surface structure, they together then decide the or color the meanings of a sentence. So they are important. Let's have a look at the implications of this theory. So here's a little review I found, and it is to some extent highlighting the importance of this theory in the understanding of deep structures. It, according to this review, Noam Chomsky's research has restructured the study of human language. That's very true. If seen carefully, it really appears that Noam Chomsky, all his theories and researches, including this one, they have highlighted a unique aspect of human language, how it is structured, how people they structure them in their daily lives. Constantly, we are structuring languages. We are playing with the words, the structures, and the meanings, how we convey them, how we actually and we are translating our minds with the help of those structures, and how our minds they decide what are the things, what are the governing elements, and what are the binding elements that are required to actually translate our minds into words. You may say that deep structure of a sentence is your mind, and the surface structure is its translation. So it has really restructured the study of human language. And the second important element is that this work is represents a significant shift in focus. You may have seen, being students of linguistics, that the focus of earlier researchers has been the study of ancient languages and such aspects, structures, and the elements of language. Chomsky's theories, they have in fact shifted that focus. It has revolutionized that approach, that how things should be perceived and how a language should be studied and approached. And you may have seen that today technology is, when it comes to language, in technology, uh, different tools, for instance, Microsoft Office and language softwares in our computers and laptops, how they're working. They basically work on the principles of transformational grammar, that if we provide a system structure or sequence, then we can produce endless sentences, logical sequences, and moreover a new direction to, or a new direction of investigation, that language should be investigated in a different way, because the things that we require most, that our community requires most, is how we can learn second languages, that are the requirement. And you can see, as the world is now global village, we need to learn languages more than ever. So this theory is actually highlighting a new direction in that investigation. So let me give you a quick review, then I will wind up. I will in fact move towards the second most important element of this lecture, that is your task. So before that, let me wind this up. Let's get to the beginning. I told you that this theory is basically, it highlights the phrase structure. So overall, I can say that covenant binding theory is basically, it highlights the internal deep plus surface structure of phrases, how each element is being governed by another, and how how elements, they have binding elements that complete the the meaning plus structure aspect of grammar. As I've told you, that grammar is the study of meaning plus structure, because meanings are very important. Without meaning, structures will be meaningless. Like I gave you an example of a meaningless structure: colorless green idea, sleep furiously. Night lakes meaning. So it carries nothing. Let me share an interesting example with you. It's my student from some previous semester. They had their English class with me. So I gave them a structure and they were required to passivize them. For instance, he goes to school. The simple solution was that passive is not possible. Or the student was required to add some object or real life material to passivize it. So the student simply followed the structural rules and came up with the sentence, "The school is gored by him." So there was an interesting phenomena. The structure was fine, but the meaning was lost. So he should have done something, he should have added something to take care of the meanings. So grammar cannot be just concerned with structures, it is also equally concerned with grammar. And this is the modern definition of grammar as far as as far as the researches are concerned, Chomsky's researches are concerned. So, common and binding theory, it highlights how structures they are strung together and how meaning they are determined by the binding elements. Very simple, I think. That's very clear. So, with due course of time, we have seen components, the level of representation, and a system of rules and regulations, and we have seen surface and deep structures. And here they are, and the government is basically the governors. They govern things, and the binding elements, they bind them together. Here is the task. So your task is that you're required to construct a sentence and elaborate it in the form of a tree diagram, and then comment on its government and binding relations. Now let me explain again. You're going to construct a sentence. While you're constructing a sentence, you should take care that you should be having in that sentence the government and binding elements. For instance, there may be a sentence that is too simple, that it has just governing elements and binding relations are not very elaborate. So you need to construct a sentence that clearly highlights these two elements, and you can take help from, for instance, from these sentences, but do not copy them. Try to be more creative, and then you should draw a tree diagram, because a tree diagram is going to help you. How is it? It is going to help you when you will draw a tree diagram like that. It will help you to see its deeper structure. If, for instance, you decide this sentence, the so this sentence is right in front of you. This is its surface structure. When you will draw its tree diagram like that, NP, VP, this tree diagram is very simple. The simple process is that you begin with NP and VP. Where is NP? The subject. The rest of the element goes into VP. Into VP, verb, put your verb here, and then the rest elements will go there. If there is a subordinate clause, then here it is. Otherwise, it may be NP and then PP, something like that. So the things are very simple. You can follow this diagram. You can use it to draw your tree diagram. And if you have any trouble, let me know. I will elaborate it further. And in fact, you will have more lectures on especially on X bar syntax, and then the things will be much more clear. So for now, you can, I think so, consider this tree diagram as very helpful, or I can suggest you books as well, where you can find more tree diagrams so you can construct them. So once you have constructed the tree diagram, then the next task is simply comment the governing elements and the binding. So govern and binding relations in that sentence, that is your job to elaborate. It is very simple. I have already done it. For instance, in this sentence, I told you people what are the governing elements, what are the governors, and use technical terminology. For instance, the term of governor, and in this sentence, you can see his mother, John, and his mother. I have uh, explained the binding relations. You're going to do the same. So don't copy me entirely. Try to be creative. Try to figure out some creative ways to elaborate those things, and things will be very, very simple. Just take into your consideration that you are basically going to comment on the phrase structure, the deep and surface structure. You can also discuss deep and surface structure of that sentence. Your focus should be what the basic aim of this theory is. That is how to elaborate the deep and surface structure of a sentence. And you should be seeing phrases first. For instance, I have told you a simple solution that when you have to break it down into phrases, simply start drawing a tree diagram, and you will simply place them in their uh, vertical sequence, parallel here, and I think so. That's how it goes, and it elaborates its structure. So that's the little task, and here are the resources. I recommend you people this article. You can download it on Google. Simply write its name, its title, Step by Step Introduction to the Government and Binding Theory of Syntax. The article will be there, and article starts with an introduction. That would be sufficient, and then a little bit you can see Wikipedia's article, and then this book, English Syntax and Argumentation. You can download it from PDF Drive or bookfi.net. These are book libraries. You can download free books from those libraries. So from their library, you can download this book, and this book will be having tree diagrams, and uh, various structures will be elaborated there. You can see those structures from there. But for government and binding theory, these two are sufficient, and for structures, for examples, you can consult this book. So these are the resources that you can download, and they can help you with your study, and they can also help you with your task. You can see various examples from the book, but don't try to copy them. Try to be creative. I have studied all these books, so I know if you copy them, I'll know that. So try to be more creative. Try to uh, construct some new sentence, a sentence in which elements that I want you to explore are already present. In fact, you're going to decide their structure. So the things that you wish to talk about are right in front of you. Rather, you miss them. So that's all for this lecture. If you have any questions, leave them in your question post, the thread we have in our classroom. I'll try to answer them. And if you require more resources for your study, let me know. I can recommend some more. Um, I hope that you people have enjoyed this lecture. I have tried to explain each and everything very, very clearly. I think they are very clear now, and you have a clear understanding. Thank you very much for your time. Allah Hafiz.